So we're going to be talking about the really neurotech startups and how to start neuromodulation, what some of these gentlemen are looking for. And we'll get into who they are in a moment. You'll notice on the agenda, it says Bob Greenberg. If anyone knows Bob, that's not Bob. It's not an imposter. He got caught up, unfortunately, Bob did, in the air controller reduction and spent hours and hours at Burbank trying to get out of there. And I don't know if anyone else missed their flight due to that, but instead we were fortunate enough to have Brian, who's the VP of Strategy, join us instead of Bob. So thank you, Brian, for joining us. So I think I only have one slide, but if we could go to the next slide, please. This is just who we have up here. And sorry, I couldn't get your picture up there, Brian. But we have representatives from Deloitte. Brad, thank you for joining us. Jordy, who I've known for 25 years, who's now with Nexus. I think you just started your second fund not too long ago after the first fund, which was $100 million. And Humanity MedTech, which most people know as the Owlman Foundation. If you want to ask why the rebranding, you're welcome to do that. Next slide, please. Just a little bit about me. I have been a consultant to many companies. First half of my career was inside industry and then consulting to a lot. And then we all know about neurotech reports, so I think we can skip that. Next slide. I think this is the last one. So Dr. Zeus actually has a new book by the same title, The Valley of Death. And so that's kind of the topic of today in terms of early stage neuromodulation companies and what these esteemed panel members are looking for in each of their entities. And in the case of Deloitte, how do they consult and what are they looking for as well? Brad has a lot of experience within industry as well. So we're going to start just with some overviews and then lots of time for some moderated Q&A and then Q&A from all of you. So please, let's start with Jordy. Why don't you come on up? As you like, maybe.
Well, thank you, Jeremy. It's true. I work with Jeremy from the early days of Advanced Ionics, and that acquisition. I don't think I have a slide. So we had the privilege to actually work in a very energetic company, Advanced Ionics, that in the late 90s, beginning 2000s, where just a few people trying to figure out how to beat Medtronic with technology at the time. It was a fast follower idea of a smaller rechargeable device that could compete better with at the time, the current product that Medtronic had with spinal cord stimulation. It was fun times. So now, I'm doing something very different. I used to start as an engineer. Now I run a venture capital firm, and it is a very I think unique venture capital firm. One of the reasons is because the LP is the people that put the money. We mostly have one. We have actually two, but the primary LP is a very large family office in the Bay Area that has a deep interest in solving neurological problems. And so how this translates to us in terms of the areas of the focus is that we are really narrow in terms of the clinical space that we're going after. And I'll briefly describe you this, the kind of main three clinical indications. And then I'll tell you more about the firm. The three ones are first Parkinson's disease, a neurodegenerative disorder. The second one is autism. The third one is bipolar. One of the nice things about these three indications, each one represents a little bit of different kind of something a bit different that's going on with the brain. Like the first one is the neurons are dying. And the second one is in the early development, particularly fetal development and early stage of the development of the person. And then the third one, psychiatric disorder with bipolar disorder, is from usually when you're a teenager and later. So that gives us it's almost like three independent vectors in physics where through the comorbidities of these disorders, because there's many things that happen to these patients, allow us to have that defines kind of the universe of clinical solutions I need to solve. For example, if you have Parkinson's disease, as the neurons keep dying, you not only have motor disorders with a tremor or dyskinesias or freezing of gait, but you do have problems with GI problems. You have problems with dementias. You have problems with the sleep. So this is how we are expanding the investable universe, while in the beginning it might seem very, very narrow, but it is not as narrow. That's what we do in the clinical side. In terms of the type of companies we invest, we do have the kind of the privilege to have a lot of flexibility in the companies we can invest. As Jeremy mentioned, we have a second fund. We started with 100 million in 2024. Now in 2025, we have like 126. And this second fund, we can break down the fund in three groups. One is for very early stage, a seed fund with a total kind of envelope of 20 million, and the check sizes are small, like 1 or 2 million. And the is designed to fund very early stage, no clinical data yet, some preclinical results, some reason to believe that this could be relevant, but very, very early. Then we have what we call the core fund, which targets more Series A to Series B, C. Sometimes we could actually go all the way to pre-IPO if needed, but the check size max is like $15 million or so. Then we have another one, another kind of sub-bucket, which is the one I'm really very, very interested, which is we see something really could be disruptive, like sort of a moonshot, things that can require a huge risk, no other investors are willing to put money. If that fits the strategy that the family office is going to go offer, we actually have access to a lot of capital to make bets that are very large. And we can put $50 million up to $75 million in a single company that maybe nobody else is investing. That's the third piece. So the message, if you are a company that kind of works in the area of clinical indications that I described, it doesn't really matter if you're very small or larger, come talk to me, and then we can see if we can help. What else? The company was founded by Bill Marks and myself. Bill Marks is a really great neurologist that some of you probably know. And we actually met at Valley Life Science when I used to work at Google for a few years. And we decided to take this, and it's been a fantastic journey. Very different from working in a company. I used to work in startups and large companies, and now investing. But I feel like after all this journey, it's all the lessons that you learn through working all these different things in the past. It's being an investor and making choices of who to bet to and what kind of things to bet feels like a good way to use my time and being useful. So that's where we're today. So I'll stop here. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm in consulting, so of course I have slides, right? It's kind of required. How do I get to the deck? As it's coming up, so I always love listening to Jim talk about the history because it makes me feel old. I was actually employee number 430 at Advanced Neuromodulation Systems. So I joined about a year before that St. Jude Medical acquisition, and it was 1.3 billion. I think our revenues that year were 117 million. So super interesting. A little bit about me. So that's my family down there and my two dogs. I have Rhodesian Ridgebacks. So those of you that love those, we can connect at coffee. Yeah, I've met my wife at orientation at Florida State. So we've been together for 35 years. We have 3 girls. We live in Dallas. I started to work with Deloitte August of 22. That was after 26 years in med tech, 19 years in neuromodulation, which has been fun because I'm in the life sciences sector, which bifurcates into pharma and med tech. And so now I've carved out a subsegment of med tech, which is neurotech, which is where I focus a lot of my effort. My favorite quote is bottom left, which is change in med tech is not viral, it's bacterial. Those of the scientists in the room understand that. But there's just so much that's already established within the marketplace. There's physician practices, there's an apprenticeship model, there's reimbursement, there's CPT codes, there's existing sites of care. And so when we think about change, everybody gets excited about a clinical outcome, but it's going to take some time to change, and it needs to be remarkably compelling. So as we think about like some of the things that I do, part of what I do is I evaluate targets for potential strategics. And I will tell you that one of the core areas that I focus is on the business model. So what I always hear, actually, I was trying to remember this line. There's a great movie that came out called Pirates of Silicon Valley. Has anybody ever seen it? Pirates of Silicon Valley, the story of Apple and Microsoft back in the day, kind of pre-iPhone. And it's like the final scene, and basically, like Steve Jobs has ripped off, Bill Gates had ripped off part of the software innovation from Steve Jobs, and he was like, and it's this big kind of standoff, and he's like, "Well, we're going to win, and because we have the better product." This is Steve Jobs speaking now, and Bill Gates is like, "You don't get it. It doesn't matter." And so I say that in the context of like they had a superior business model. They were ubiquitous when it came to business machines. They were embedded in every single PC that came out. And so they established this kind of network effect that was far superior. And it was interesting. I listened to or I saw the highlights on the earnings call for Apple recently, and almost 30% of their revenue now is coming from services, right? So they got the message, they learned about the business model, and clearly have been successful. This is probably the most dense consulting slide I've ever seen. I didn't make this. I can't make this. I did not grow up in consulting, so it's borderline microfiche, so get your monocle. But I just wanted you to see, this is one of the things, I will tell you that being part of St. Jude Medical and Abbott and being in like leadership positions, we were kind of shamed to use professional services for strategic work. They're kind of like, hey, if you need help with strategy work, maybe we'll find somebody who can do it for you. But I will say that I've seen the light now that I've been with Deloitte to see all the different things that can be done and the benefit of an outside-in perspective and being able to steal ideas from even other parts of life sciences. Like we were so razor focused on neurotech that we didn't even look at medtech, and we definitely didn't look at pharma. We looked down on pharma, right? But there's some brilliant things to be learned. And so I will tell you, there's lots of different things that we do. We're a 180-year-old company, 70 billion last year, 470,000 employees. So I'm like a grain of sand on the Deloitte beach, but a big group, lots of capabilities. And I'm usually 1 to 2 phone calls away from a world expert in just about any topic. So it's really been educational for me, and I feel like I've had a chance to have a bigger impact across medtech. I think Jim mentioned that he can share slides with you. I'm going to do the same. I don't want to take away from our panel too much, but I just want you to see a quick snapshot of kind of what we're seeing in terms of major trends in medtech. And of course, these are true across neurotech, especially, or at least in addition to. And so we see shifts in site of care. In fact, just at the end of October, you may have seen that there were some changes with regard to reimbursement within neuromodulation, specifically DBS, PNS, SCS. So look at those. You know, I'm very much a student of behavioral science. So those of you that have read Nudge or Alchemy, these are some of my favorite books. If you want to understand behavior, you got to understand the incentives. And so it's really important for you to have command over the reimbursement. So make sure if you haven't reviewed the recommended reimbursement changes for 26 that you look those over. There are some pretty significant changes. One of them was paddle leads, for example, in the ambulatory surgery center. They weren't commonly done there. However, it was probably reimbursing about $10,000 to $12,000 more per system to put in a paddle lead, and that came back about 20% this year. And so is that going to change some of the collaboration we see between pain management and spine physicians doing the cases in that area, or is it simply right-sizing the reimbursement to be more similar to percutaneous implantation? The other thing I wanted to just point out is bottom right, this idea of diagnostic. I think what's hidden in this concept is this idea of getting control of the patient journey. So one of the core problems that MedTech has is we intervene late in the continuum only at the HCP. And when I compare, you know, kind of the approach that MedTech would take versus, say, pharma is contacting the patient early on. They have great data. They understand the journey. They have tremendous provision for patient assistance programs to include driving them to the physician's office, right? Whereas in MedTech, typically we're just like spending time trying to drive brand preference and do some moderate demand creation. And so when you see diagnostics, think about maybe a broader topic of trying to get upstream on the patient journey in order to shape when they're considered for some of these more advanced end of continuum therapies. So I'm gonna skip over these because these are just more detail. I had to look up Section 232 investigation. This is when an import could be a potential risk of national security. So I would say that Jim mentioned this idea of BCI. I would say if BCI, hey Jim, I would say if BCI is coming from China, that would definitely be a Section 232 issue. But a couple of trends I thought were really interesting here. So we talk about revenues. So I want to understand context. So the revenues in medtech are about half that of pharma. So when you see this number, it's about half that of pharma. And you look at the growth rate. Commercial leaders in this context is anyone who's doing 500 million or more. Okay, so this is where you're going to start to see this divergence and then kind of convergence as some of these more commercial leaders start to aggregate and acquire some of the smaller players in order to create some inorganic innovation. This is a really hard slide to read, but if you follow kind of the, I don't know, what color is that? Magenta, this big pharma. So look at the magenta curve, you see it kind of rise in the middle and then be a little erratic. But if you look at the total value within kind of the medtech industry versus pharma, you can see that they're rewarded a lot more than medtech for what you could say is similar performance. Now, therapeutic devices. So one thing I want to, I get asked to evaluate some of these more creative models, whether they're diagnostic, not therapeutic, or observational, right? There's a fair amount of these ideas of wearables or whether they're implantables, but don't deliver therapy. So like internal cardiac monitoring, for example, or pulmonary artery pressure devices, things like CardioMEMS or Cordella. These are non-therapeutic. You could say, well, it gives you a chance to intervene. Yes, but in and of themselves, they're not therapeutic. So as you look at some of these big circles, you see some of the diagnostic, and then you see some movement around therapeutic. This is where kind of back to this idea of identifying patients early on. I think these more observational devices will help us identify patient candidates for the therapies. And so you'll see a greater linkage in these companies going forward. This, those of you that know me know that I spent some time in clinical research strategy. I'm also a big fan of, therefore, of evidence. And when I think about creating evidence, I'm not really creating evidence to like compel the physician to use my product. Many times I'm using it to get my FDA approval, but my hardest stakeholder is the payer. And so when we engineer evidence, that's partially what we're trying to do. I point that out in this slide because if you look at the far right, index, this is talking about PMA. And on the left, it's talking about 510K. So look at we're talking about 1% or PMA. And I say that in the context of evidence because the PMAs are required to do the actual clinical studies. And so those are the ones that come to market usually with evidence, right? Their original PMAs, PMASs, new indications. When we talk about some of the peripheral nerve stimulation, this is our business. Like when I was with Advanced Neuromodulation Systems, they'd been on market with a peripheral nerve stimulation since 1981. And in fact, if you look at the filings for the peripheral nerve stimulators, they almost always reference the product that came from Advanced Neuromodulation Systems. I say that because they exited that market. And so if you ever want to talk about peripheral nerve stimulation, what are some of the pitfalls and some of the advantages, we should talk about that because but I think the real key here is that if they take the 510K path, substantial equivalence, and don't generate the evidence, they're going to be down that same path, right? It's going to be the same, very short-lived. And so I think by virtue of Nalu getting picked up by Boston, we'll likely have at least the wherewithal to invest in the level of evidence creation. And I think that's really the last one I wanted to talk about, except the fact that just from an M&A deal flow, the deal flow this year has been extraordinary. I mean, I just did 3 M&A deals just in the last 8 weeks. So just brace yourselves. It's going to increase over time. So thank you and look forward to the rest of the panel.
Thanks, Brad. My name's Brian Meck. I'm the Vice President of Strategy for Humanity MedTech. And just a little bit of background on me. I've been in the medical device space for a little over 25 years. Most of that is in neuromod. And a big chunk of that time was at Second Sight Medical Products, which was one of the first companies aimed at restoring vision. Anyways, let's talk about Humanity MedTech. As Jeremy mentioned, we were formerly known as the Alfred Mann Foundation for Scientific Research. We changed the name and rebranded in 2023, and I'm not going to spend time on why we did that, but if people have questions about it, I'm happy to answer it. The thing about Humanity MedTech is we have a very unique business model. We're not a venture capitalist. We don't do any arm's length investing. We're not an incubator. We don't house companies at our facility. We're not a CDMO. Despite our name, we're not even a MedTech company. So we're a 501c3 not-for-profit whose business is sort of perpetual new product development. And that's what we've done for 40 years now. And early on, we were built to de-risk really early stage technologies, things that were so early they couldn't attract institutional or venture capital. And now we've kind of applied that to things that can no longer attract institutional capital. We recently acquired a distressed asset. They had, run out of their Series A money. And they were having trouble with their Series B, but they had clinical data, including chronic human clinical data, that was really impressive. And so we're just, we're more risk tolerant, and we take a longer term view than an 8-year fund does. And so we were pretty excited because this is a big, I'm not going to talk about the indication, but it's a really important one. And so if it is successful, it's going to have huge impact on healthcare worldwide. But that's what we do. We bridge the gap. Our valley of death is that really early one, the valley that exists between a great idea and being able to raise capital. So we're about 120 people total. 75 of them are engineers or scientists. We have a large facility in Santa Clarita, California. We actually have our own manufacturing on site. We do small volume manufacturing to get through clinicals. And at any given time, we're running between 2 and 5 programs. Currently, we have 4. And we hire some really smart people, and we do a lot of filing on intellectual property. So I said before, we're not a med tech company, and we're not. But we have everything a med tech company has except for sales and marketing, because we never commercialize products ourselves. So the model is this. Do the product development, do the clinical development, show that it works so that you can attract institutional capital. Then we spin it out. We hire a management team, we spin it out. We'll participate alongside those institutional investors in typically the Series A, B, and even sometimes the C round. So we have equity in those companies, and then that equity eventually monetizes, and typically there's royalties flowing back to us as well for the IP that we've developed along the journey. So here's an example or sort of a timeline of some of the companies or technologies that have spun out of what was the foundation, now Humanity MedTech. Starting with MiniMed, which became Medtronic's diabetes division, and I guess now they're divesting. Advanced Bionics. So the cochlear implant was developed at the foundation. That was the original product for Advanced Bionics, acquired by Boston, bought back by Al, now with Sonova. Sticking with Advanced Bionics, they also bought the spinal cord stimulator that we developed, one that we developed that was then done at Advanced Bionics. So that's now Boston Scientific's Neuromod division. Bioness, Jim talked about briefly today. They've also gone through various stages of acquisition and divestiture. Second Sight was a company I was at. And our most recent example of success would be Axonics, which pelvic floor sacral nerve stimulator. Yeah, it was acquired by Boston last year for $3.7 billion. So this is how we do it over and over again. So the mandate is we have to interface with the human nervous system. What that has meant historically is neuromod for sure, and a little bit of drug delivery. But these days we're actually looking in some newer areas as well, just to try and diversify. We're looking at interventional technologies, ones that, one and done kind of things, neurodiagnostics, and even health tech. And so that's a little bit about us, so I'm going to pause there.
So thank you. Just an interesting observation, Brian, where with Alman and Humanity MedTech or Alman Foundation, 3 of his biggest successes, Pacesetter, which was before the foundation. So Pacesetter, Axonics, and Advanced Bionics with the spinal cord stimulation, multi-billion-dollar exits on 2 of those. And they were the first in each of the sectors with a rechargeable battery. So just interesting that part of it had to do with timing, but not a huge evolution, but just perfect timing with a better product. So first question, Jordy, let's actually start with you. You mentioned your fund that you invest in seed investments. what do you look for and how early is too early? If I have an idea, if I have a patent but no team, speak a little bit about that.
So yes, and just to make sure, so we invest all the way from very, very early stage to even pre-IPO. So that's one thing. But in terms of the seed fund, and we have John Probst in there, sitting in there, that is responsible of running the seed fund. What we're looking is a plausible understanding of mechanistic action that can create a clinical effect that will be relevant for the patients that we care. That's the first thing. And then sometimes, even if it's just an idea, an IP from university, as long as there's this kind of that component, then we actually may be able to start looking seriously into this. And then even if there's only one person, then we help that person to hire the first management team and provide the first seed fund. We usually also have a network of other investors to start pulling some of the money on the syndicate and start going. So we can really start from almost nothing. And another thing is very, very important, and I think all investors will say that it's not just the idea, it's not just a plan that you have, it's also what makes you special. What is the capacities or the credibility that the person that will lead in the company will have? Because there's so much uncertainty with anything that you that the human component of trying to trust somebody that can do something special is super important.
Out of curiosity, how many in the audience raise your hand if you are in that seed stage? Sorry, Jordy.
Oh, yeah. I'm going to go by the back door.
Fantastic. No, I'm glad you're all here. Just to follow up, so I'm an early seed stage because we're talking about navigating that valley of death and the earliest stage. It's so hard to attract capital. So thank you for what you do and putting that money in those early stage companies. But typically, if you're writing a check for $1 million and it's an early stage, a very early stage company, how do you evaluate what portion of the company you take? Is it a set formula or it's a case by case?
It's a case by case. Normally, because at this stage, there's not a lot of value, but you have to create an incentive for the founder. So it's often just an alignment between the founder and the investors to ensure that, because there will be so much dilution into the future, right? Because as you go through the serious rounds, the founder, it's important for founder to understand that the initial equity doesn't really reflect what you're going to be getting at the end, because as I said, it's a winding road, and as long as the investors believe in the founder, they'll find formulas to either through issue new refresh stock options or things like this that can keep equity such that it will be an incentive. So that's one piece. But in terms of value, most of the time it's just something that feels right for both investors and the founder. Yeah.
Brad, you had talked about focus on business models, and I know we've talked about this a little bit in advance before, but take away reimbursement because we know how critical that is. So what other considerations when you're looking at the business model outside? Is there current reimbursement or a reimbursement pathway? What are the other considerations?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really about having a really strong value narrative, right? So like we think about cost, but we should be thinking about opportunity costs. So what does it really save, the clinicians in terms of time? What does it displace in terms of like time that could be invested in other high value, high impact, high difficulty type of activities? And so when I think about the business model, it's at least translating what you have as your clinical story into strong economic principles, whether that's, in terms of payback, cost avoidance, whether it's readmission, rehospitalization, you can go on down the line. A big part of it is just to be really clear about what value it brings. And again, that can be pure monetary value. Like you said, you kind of take reimbursement out of the equation. Well, what does it save in terms of time? So I'll give you an example. The whole concept of like remote monitoring, it is an infinitesimally small amount of money relative to the time investment in most cases, right? And yet, we talk about how big a portion of the new market we want to be kind of mediated through this like remote patient monitoring, remote therapy management. And so I would just say, again, just to be pragmatic about like what the value it is that it brings relative to the time investment. So.
Great. And you had mentioned in terms of doing a lot of evaluation work for strategics. So what do you see in, when you look at the strategics, what are they looking for today? What are the hot sectors?
Yeah.
If you were to start a company or you wanted to kind of pivot in order to align it with a strategic, both for investment and perhaps eventual exit?
Yeah, I mean, maybe there's a selection bias, but I gravitate towards device therapies. And so what typically we find, spinal cord stimulation is a perfect example of how you have a revenue episode, which is the implantation, but then you have a service and support burden that goes into perpetuity, right? Sometimes you'll get a replacement IPG, which will be a revenue event, but for the most part, these are services and value that you're providing at no cost as a manufacturer, because that's just considered the standard operating procedure within that category. I tell you that because one of the core drivers here is SG&A as a percentage of revenue is huge relative to their peer group. So you take a Boston Scientific, you take a Medtronic, you take an Abbott, and you take the neuromodulation BU, P&L relative to their peer group, and you're going to find their SG&A is typically way out of whack relative to their peer group.
Does everyone know what SG&A is? Okay. Just making sure.
Sales comp, basically. So and they're very highly paid too, right? So they're highly paid, and you have lots of activities that are being done that aren't linked directly to revenue. And so what they're looking for is, can they get channel leverage? So when I think about targets, can I put something in the bag of a representative that's established a wonderful relationship with their customer base? Can I give them another product that's complementary, not necessarily to the therapy that I'm selling, but complementary to the channel I'm selling into? And so can I use that so that I'm getting more revenue per head, per account, same store sales increase, right? That's an opportunity. The other one is like capabilities. So what are the additional capabilities? So one of the examples you had in here is Bioness. Well, one of the cool things that they do is, of course, they're billing the insurance companies directly. So essentially the physician just has their pro fee. They don't have to put a cash outlay in order to acquire like the HA treatment. And they're billing the insurance companies directly. Cochlear has a similar process with processor upgrades. So I think about those are capabilities, right? They have provider status. They have full teams of people that do reimbursement. They're dealing directly with those companies, so capabilities. So the first one's channel leverage, second one's capabilities, and the third one is really about upstream in the patient journey. Like, so how much more of, they're often at the end of the treatment continuum, how much more upstream in the patient journey can they occupy, both to shape when they end up being a candidate for the ultimate therapy, and other sources of revenue along the way.
Jim, is it okay if I go until 10 after? Okay, perfect.
My fault.
Brian, your turn. Humanity MedTech, you look at its history. I mean, you've developed companies that have exited for more than $12 billion. Exonics, MiniMed, and Advanced Bionics alone is over $10 billion. First of all, is there any opportunity for anyone out there to work with you other than, saying we're a distressed company?
So yeah, it's hard because, like I said, we're not an arm's length investor. If we do partner with an outside group, we have to have at least 50% of the equity. You have to control the product and clinical development program for that, because that's what we do best. And typically that's often a non-starter for founders, especially if they've already raised capital. It can be a non-starter for their board. So it can be a really challenging discussion. So usually we're sourcing things that are either quite early, pre-seed, like they haven't even raised capital. And what we offer is freedom from pursuing capital for a while, because we have an evergreen fund. So you come and you work technically kind of for us, and we'll fund the program to whatever milestone we think is appropriate to then go outside and raise capital. So you don't have to, a CEO's job for most of his or her life is raising capital, and we just take that off the table for a while, and so it allows you to pursue an idea. It's really ideal for sort of inventors that don't, like clinicians that maybe don't want to give up their day job, but they have a great idea. They want to participate in it as a consultant, and they want to have the financial upside, but they're not going to be running that company. Or similarly, people that have struggled to raise capital but have a great idea, then we can have that conversation. But typically, they have to pound the street first and figure out it's not going to happen, and then they come back and talk to us. So,
Brian, you're the VP of strategy over at Humanity. How do you go about, finding the next billion-dollar company?
Yeah, so it's complex, right? So there's no sort of one solution, certainly no one scalable solution that we found anyway. So what we are doing now is we build up ecosystems geographically. So I'm based in the Twin Cities, so I'm building up an ecosystem in the Midwest of tech transfer offices, sponsored research offices, people, like I'm in the Midwest, so Boston Scientific employees, Medtronic employees, just networking, going to local events like University of Minnesota Neuromodulation meeting that happens every year, MedTech MVP, and those kinds of things, just establishing. And that's actually been the most productive way of uncovering new ideas. We've also been, as an organization, and we do that again now in Southern California and Northern California, sort of the Southwest and the Northwest. So that still leaves large parts of the country sort of uncovered for us at this point. We've also been trying to sort of market ourselves as a company. So, we have had increased presence in social media. We've redone our website. We do get inbound inquiries through the website that are much more focused and targeted. We get a lot of spam as well, but we've actually had some very interesting opportunities come inbound from people that have just heard about us. But so I expect that over time, as we build a bit of a brand, that might happen more often for us.
Jordy, do you have a similar or different approach in terms of kind of uncovering the next opportunity?
Yeah, well, it's diverse. So yeah, there's a lot had to do with relationships and actually meetings like this can be very helpful sources of that. But we also have a lot of inbound requests because our firm starts to be noticed. So we have a bunch of unsolicited emails coming to us. And then we have our network of KOLs where we usually consult in different areas. In our case, we are learning to do it a bit more differently now, which is first, what we do is a landscape analysis based on all the clinical description I was telling before, and that creates a certain white spaces area that we identified ahead of time. And then, so instead of just waiting for people to reach us randomly for all these different things, we first do the identification of landscape, and then we more intentionally go after companies and ideas that are in this white space.
Great. One question for all of you, and then we're going to see who in the audience who has some questions. Non-invasive neuromodulation. That's all I'm going to say. Make a comment in terms of what's your opinion of non-invasive. Where are the opportunities? Would you invest in that sector or not? And if so, where?
My panelist answer first.
Well, we're an investor in Focus Ultrasound. We're on the board of Insight Tech. It's true that the first business they have is essentially microablation for essential tremor and Parkinson's disease using high energy, but the low energy modality of that, because you can kind of trim down the energy, then neuromodulation is very interesting opportunity to expand the business. You need to have an indication where the regime of the dosage is compatible with the use case. So if you need to have a constant neuromodulation effect, don't use a LIFO because you just can't. So it has to be something that what you do has a memory effect. A memory effect that is either clinically valuable enough to just do it once or do it with a low enough frequency to justify the payments. But it's really important.
So Brian, I once had a non-invasive startup that I approached Humanity MedTech, and they're very skeptical. What's their opinion today?
Well, I think, so I'm not going to comment on sort of magnetic or ultrasonic stimulation, but focusing more on electrical stim, or in your case, vibrational stim. I think the business model is tough. So I think absolutely wearables should be a part of our healthcare. It just makes so much sense. When the conditions are met the way Jordy described them, it's so much less expensive to treat people with a wearable than it is with an implant. Having said that, many companies have failed, and I think still the torchbearer is Cala Health, and thankfully Cala has had some success, and I hope it continues to go further because they've invested. They've raised capital almost like a pharma company or a CVRX. I think they have to be successful, at least on the electrical stim side.
And Brad, particularly from a strategic perspective,
Yeah.
any dialogue with the
Yeah.
strategics?
Yeah, I think that they have a place, particularly if they're on the. I know I sound like a broken record, but on the treatment continuum. So telehealth is a really good example of getting the notion of electrical stimulation to address ET. Then is the next natural component going to be an insight tech, or is it going to be a deep brain stimulation system? So I do like it that it conceptually fits, and it might be an easy entryway into the concept of neuromodulation. What I typically see, and Cal is actually a really good example of an exception to this rule, is it's a shortcut to revenue. Like most of the time, the what I see as minimally invasive and externalized power sources is used as a mechanism to speed time to market, and they're not doing the necessary investigational and evidence creation work to legitimize it. Next thing you know, it's relegated as a copper bracelet. Basically, you know what I mean? So I think a big part of this is like, are they going to invest in the science, irrespective of whether it's an implanted device and required by the FDA or not? Are they invested in the evidence? Are they going to make sure that it's reimbursable? And does it have really strong physiologic underpinnings that justify its use?
Let's take a few questions from the audience.
Yeah, we have time for maybe one or two quick questions, and then we're going to go on break. Anyone? You identify yourself.
Yeah, hi, Zach Sperry from Inspire Medical. I think you identified one of the valleys of death where you're talking idea to capital, but obviously it seems like there's sort of a, it's a road with lots of bumps in it. It seems like one of the most challenging valleys of death is that, unsuccessful or moderately successful first clinical trial. How do you help people navigate that really significant valley of death, which is maybe for a more mature company?
Well, it is so the reality is that medtech investment is a very, very tough. It's a very tough journey, and if you don't have a strong signal that your clinical effect will justify that kind of investment patients, you're probably going to die. I mean, that is very quick. If you look at the recent exits on medtech, the majority, I'm not talking neuromod, I'm talking general medtech, a large portion of these exits, the only people that made money was the last deals, the last portion, the last either crossover, maybe the second two was. So it is just undeniably very. So, and then you don't even have a good rationale why somebody should be paying for it. Because if you have that, you're gonna, as I said, die.
All right, maybe one more quick question. Is anyone?
Thank you so much. I'm Cyril Wash from Brainspoke, Thailand. So I wonder if you guys are giving funds to wearable tech device like non-medical grade, and are you putting money into preventative technology?
Yeah, we're not investing in companies. So if the question is about what is a market access path, we really focus on things that have very strong clinical value. And right now, the consumer path doesn't, will not give you that. Because you require a lot of investment in clinical evidence, you require a lot of innovation. So we don't do that. That said, though, consumer wearable technology do have a very large role to play now and in the future. I was using the Apple Watch to make an assessment on OSA, right? I used to work at Google when we spent a lot of time thinking about the intersection between consumer health and healthcare. So, but yes, but we don't do it.
Great. Unfortunately, we're out of time. It is now the break. I wanted to thank all of our panel members. Thank you for a wonderful session.